All right, all right, all right. I'm gonna just start over. Hello, everyone. My name is Selina Collins, and today I'll be talking about how heroin creates addiction. Heroin creates addiction in two ways. One being physical, and second being psychological. Heroin is a highly addictive opioid that causes both physical and psychological dependency. Heroin connects to the mu opioid receptors in the brain, causing a flood of dopamine, which the mu receptors are a type of G protein coupled receptors found in the central nervous system. These play the role of basically mediating the effects of a pain relief, a euphoric feeling, and addiction. So that's just a little bit about the mu opioid receptors. Um, Dopamine is basically released when doing like pleasurable activities, making it to where causing us to want to do it more and kind of seek and want to do it more. Um, so the brain adjusts to its natural production of dopamine and endorphins, making the user, that's what makes the user dependent on heroin because it reduces the brain's natural production of dopamine and starts to rely on the basically the fake um, dopamine that the drug is providing. Um, this physical dependency leads to a tolerance, needing more of it to achieve the same effect. And this is explaining how it creates the addiction and withdrawals, such as pain, nausea, sweating, anxiety, and intense craving when the drug is not used or when they've gone without the drug for a little bit. Okay, next slide. So the psychological addiction, basically heroin creates a strong emotional craving to the intense euphoria and relief it provides from stress and emotional pain. So, um, this basically the brain and you become addicted to it. You become like reliant on it to cope with different issues like stress. They become really reliant on it. Users begin to rely on heroin as a coping mechanism, leading to excessive use and drug-seeking behavior. The brain's reward system becomes modified, prioritizing drug use over just anything, daily activities, relationship responsibilities. It's almost as if they'll do anything for it and lose relationships behind it. So, some of the risk of addiction, heroin is one of the highest risk of addiction amongst all drugs. With only a few usage of it can trigger dependency due to its rapid effect to the brain's pleasure system. Continuous use can alter the brain's structure, making the decision-making area, such as the prefrontal lobe area of your brain. It can affect your decision making, and with longer use, it can make it really hard. It can make it really hard to treat without professional treatment. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Vivian, and I'll be discussing how heroin works in the brain, and I'll also be discussing street names and cost of the substance. So as my classmate Selena, pointed out, opioid is highly addictive. It's an opioid antagonist, which means that it binds to receptors in the body, which produce an action potential, which can be either inhibitory or excitatory. Opiates can bind to mu delta kappa receptors, which are responsible for regulating pain response. So in heroin, the mu opioid receptor is activated, and that activates the reward system in the brain. And so the way that it does this is somebody would consume the drug, substance would enter the brain through the blood-brain barrier, and it can enter the blood-brain barrier because it is lipid soluble, which is also why it can act really fast. So once it is in the blood-brain barrier and it passes through into the brain, it gets converted to morphine. Morphine then binds to the opioid receptors, and as we know, morphine is highly addictive, so it causes an unnatural amount of dopamine to be released in the body. And so, too much dopamine overwhelms the natural body system, and it teaches the brain that it needs to go ahead and depend on heroin, which can lead to tolerance increase, as Selena mentioned, and therefore addiction. Also, heroin use can flood opioid receptors, which causes natural endorphins of the body to decrease and again leads to tolerance increase and physical dependence. So my next slide is a little bit continued of how the brain works. So some short-term effects on heroin in the brain include a rush, so euphoric feeling, also followed by a high phase, which can last 1 to 2 hours. These phases are characterized again by overwhelming feelings of pleasure. You can feel warm, you can feel completely devoid of pain because you have those extra artificial, opioids. And so there are long-term effects also on the brain, which include structural brain changes, so deterioration in memory, behavioral changes, difficulty learning. There's also changes to the neurotransmitters, specifically the dopamine system, and the dysregulation, which causes, issues with psychological diseases such as disease, anxiety, other mood regulation disorders, and even sleep disturbances sometimes, and even more cognitive impairments, which tie into structural brain changes, memory issues with organizing as well. So this slide is just to show you guys, the dopamine pathway in the brain, and why, heroin would have these sort of effects, on the dopamine pathway and how we see people who have issues with motivation or, that heightened, euphoria feeling, or compulsive and risky behaviors as well can also result as a side effect of using heroin. You can also see that it blocks pain messages. It can also cause issues with the respiratory drive, as well as those emotion dysregulations that I, kind of mentioned. So heroin primarily affects the endogenous opioid system in addition to the dopamine pathways. Opiates increase the activity of dopamine containing neurons in the VTA, and the VTA is responsible for, kind of releasing dopamine neurotransmitters into the brain, which is why we see these issues with these people. And so my next slide is just street names and costs. So costs can vary depending on, supply and demand. So like for example, in Hawaii, it's not very accessible, so it's a little bit more pricey versus like maybe in California, there's more suppliers, so it would be a little bit cheaper. Quality also plays into effect. So if it's laced, if it's not laced, and types. So I didn't know this, but there's different types: white, black, brown. Prices can range from $20 to $400 per gram. They can be sold in individual bags, which can cost $5 to $10, or they can actually do wholesale, which can range anywhere from 16K to 60K per kilogram, which is kind of a lot. So street names are brown sugar, dope, smack, big H, and then there's a little bit more obscure ones, as you see with heroin that is laced with fentanyl or cocaine. And then my last slide is just pictures of, examples of heroin. On the left is liquid heroin packets. On the top, right-hand corner is the white heroin and then brown heroin. And then I'll be passing it on to my colleague, Brisia.
Hello, I'll be doing the history of the drug heroin. Before there was a pill or syringe, there was a flower, Papaver somniferum, commonly known as opium poppy. This natural substance is a dried milky latex that is taken from the unripe seed pod of the poppy plants. Frederick Sterner isolated morphine from opium in 1803. Codeine, it's molecular, I put the molecular formula there, and it was isolated from opium in the year of 1832. History continue here. The substance codeine is alkaloid found in opium poppy plant. Heroin was first made by C.R. Elder Wright in 1874 from morphine, a natural product of the opium poppy. In the 1800s, doctors treated patients with opioids to relieve pain. It was especially used for respiratory and gastrointestinal illnesses. Thousands of soldiers during the Civil War became addicted to opioids. The additive nature of opioids was not well understood at that time. Heroin soon appeared as Bayer and became a substitute for morphine. Overdose caused the medicine to get banned eventually. Legalized opioids. A new form of opioid caused the opioid epidemic in the 1990s and still to today. This medication is oxycodone, a pain medication that's prescribed by doctors. It is the form of a pill. The Sacklers are the owners of a pharmaceutical company who introduced oxycodone to doctors and eventually to the world. Oxycodone continues to be legally prescribed by doctors, but is more tightly regulated. There's manufactured counterfeit pills containing a synthetic opioid, which is fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that is 100 times more potent than morphine. And it's the leading cause of overdose deaths here in the United States currently. Society issues. Addiction to heroin has caused significant issues like increased violence, crime rate, and transmission of diseases like hepatitis B and C and HIV. And that's the end of my presentation.
So this is just our reference. Thank you so much.